My name is Reed Turchi. I have a new album out called World on Fire, and we're here on Talkin' Blues.
Reed, your mother was a classical violist.
Still is, but yeah.
Okay, still is. Was
Yeah.
she professional, or is she professional?
No. No, I probably am the one that derailed her career with my coming into the world. But she plays in a lot of different ensembles and quartets and larger like community orchestras and things like that. She's always learning, but it's not her profession.
I wonder. I know that she put you into classical music, or got you into piano lessons, but I wonder what influence her musical direction had for you.
Yeah, I think that, she was at St. Olaf in the music program there, which is a pretty serious music school. And it tells me a funny story of sitting around her dorm room with a bunch of fellow students, and they were debating what year they would start their child in Suzuki method. Whether is it at 1 month, is it at 1 week, is it at how early is early enough? Um, but that's not the household I grew up in. I didn't start any musical lessons until third grade, and that was piano in a very introductory way. That wasn't the sort of hyper regimented classical life, for better or worse. It's a conversation I enjoy having with her now, because she continues to play classical viola. I play guitar and still play a little piano and produce and audio engineer and all of that. And yeah, I mean, they're two very different musical lives, but it's fun to talk to her about the overlap and the differences.
When you first played classical piano, did that connect with you at all?
No. Um, I think one of the more infamous moments was that she caught me practicing piano, doing whatever exercise I was supposed to be doing, but with headphones in, listening to other music. And I have a feeling that I wasn't fooling anyone with the sounds that were audible at home. And um, yeah, I think for me, I was always very attracted to and living in sound and music, but figuring out how I could make sounds and music that reflected the emotional relationship I wanted to have with sound and music. That took a while. I mean, that's still what's in process, but that was not instant. The like intro to piano songs and those things uh, were not the songs that spoke my heart.
What did speak to your heart? Like, what were you listening to while you were pretending like you're playing the thing that you were playing, listening to?
Yeah, I think that's where a lot of my dad's influence comes in, who's a big music listener but not a player. A lot of blues music, a lot of roots music. We've been laughing because I run a recording studio in Manhattan and do and engineer a lot of jazz. And I've been trying to catch up on my jazz ears, and listening to it. I've been on a big Mingus kick recently, and my dad was very amused because he's like, "Yeah, like I played for you while you were a baby on repeat." I was like, "Oh, no wonder these melodies are so familiar." Um, and for me, my mom had a Fulbright in Norway as a roving scholar. What would have been my freshman year of high school, and we moved to Norway and for a year. And while there, I started to get into blues piano and boogie woogie piano, like heavily inspired by like Pete Johnson, and like real left hand rhythmic and then right hand solo-y sort of patterns. And um, that started to be something that really felt like music I loved playing, like coming out of me, not just learning from the page and turning back through the notes. And in Norway, I met an incredible blues pianist named Tor Becken, Dr. Becken, who I didn't know at the time, but flew back and forth to New Orleans every year to play with Eddie Bow, who was his legend and his mentor, and he had done that for decades. Um, and so, ironically, I got this sort of crash course in really like encyclopedic knowledge and different left hand rhythms, different stylings, different New Orleans stride versus Chicago versus Mississippi versus St. Louisian types of left hand patterns and blues patterns from a Norwegian guy. And I'm hugely grateful for that. But that was the turning point of like, oh, this is something I can play that feels like me. And when I came back to the US after that year was up and went back to my piano teacher, who I had been gradually growing with at home, he heard me play once and was like, "No, like now you can play. Like our time is over. Like enjoy yourself and go on to other things and learn and keep going. But like you can play now. This isn't a conversation." And and yeah, so in terms of turning points, that was probably my progression. I think the only thing that turned me away from piano was a few years later. And this is a bit of a leap, but when I started to get really into slide guitar and that avenue of sort of roots blues music and artists like Mississippi Fred McDowell as sort of a classic, or Luther Dickinson as a more contemporary player. That's a sound that's not available on the piano. And that was it. I mean, that was the whole motivation for changing instruments, was wanting to be able to chase that sound.
I'm curious. Did learning how to play blues piano, did that come easy to you after your formal classical lessons?
Yeah, it came very easily. And it was a mode that made sense and still really makes sense to my brain, I mean, there are so many more advanced piano players and blues piano players out there than I'll ever be that it seems silly to talk about. But the the relationship of the left and right hand in that style of playing made a lot of sense to me and was something that clicked fairly quickly. Not instantly or anything like that, but it came together pretty quickly. And then when I had it, it felt so at home. Um, and I don't know what that's the combination of. If that's just influence, from a young age, or just the shape of my skull or whatever. Like those become pretty interesting questions when you think about why certain individuals are drawn to certain music.
How did you like your time in Norway? The 1 year in Norway as a young kid, I presume that it would have probably upended your world in a way.
It did big time. I think that equivalent of freshman year of high school, being away for that was pretty rough. That was 12 turning on 13, which I think it would have been easier as a like a child, but it was pretty brutally isolating socially. And and I think, I mean, if I look at different moments of my life where there was sort of upheaval or change, those are all moments where I've turned back into solo music making as hard as possible. I think of like, yeah, transitional years and transitional times, and that's always when I'm most likely to be in my zone in terms of exploring a specific sound or making a certain thing. So on the downside, I mean, it's a very interesting experience. And on the downside, pretty socially brutal for me. I was a very shy kid, and I sort of exploded out of that in Norway, being so desperate to connect with people and learning Norwegian and all of that. And then when I came back home after that, and I could speak the same language, everything socially felt so easy. And all of a sudden, I was very outgoing and involved in a ton of things. And I don't know if like my core changed, but my ability to present myself had changed really dramatically over that time. Uh,
I wonder that experience of getting into the blues piano. I don't know, would that have changed your confidence level at all?
I think all of it did. I mean, I think you have moments in life where you turn to something really internally focused for one reason or another, and then what comes out of the other side of that is usually transformed in some way. Um, and for me, yeah, I definitely played more piano that year in Norway than probably many other years of my life combined. That was the incubation period for that sound and for that version of myself.
I don't know if you would have been aware, but or aware now how big the blues is in Norway.
Only vaguely. I mean, I see the like festival listings and I see all of that. I've gotten to tour in Europe a decent amount, but never in Scandinavia. And it would be, I look forward to when that happens because that will be a very interesting full circle.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
Okay, so you come back and then you get intrigued by slide guitar. How easy was it for you to learn the guitar?
Um, I mean, that's still a that's still a work in progress every day. I think I think that maybe this is wrong, but I think the more typical story is that a young guitar player gets really infatuated with rock music and then sort of works their way back to more roots of that. For whatever reason, for me, it went pretty straight to like the Mississippi Fred McDowell and R.L. Burnside and Junior Kimbrough world of North Mississippi blues. And the challenging part of that is that those are all extraordinarily idiosyncratic players. I mean, that's why they're iconic, and that's why so many people have, they all three of those musicians, I would say, made very conscious decisions to stay in one style throughout their life and were offered roads to go away from that, but chose not to. But those are all recordings that don't quite sit in standard tuning. Even if the tuning is EADGBE, they're always a bit flat or a lot flat or kind of flat. And like Fred McDowell's open E tuning drifts between just sharp of open E to like all the way down to like based on a C sharp as the bottom note with the same interval. So I taught myself all that stuff, but was teaching myself these like very strange entry point bits and pieces and then expanding out from there. Um, and I had like a vague background with piano, but I never sat down and like learned to play Hey Joe on guitar or sat down and learned what an E pentatonic scale is on guitar. Like it was that's or like how to form a triad. Those are all things that I've slowly and painfully taught myself just so that I could communicate with other musicians much later. But my entry to guitar was all here's this incredible sound, and then slowly unpacking, like, okay, it's open tuning. Okay, he's using finger picks. Okay, this isn't quite tuned anywhere that matches up with a tuner. It's like, and that, I think it increased some of my listening abilities, and it led to some interesting playing techniques of my own. But yeah, it's been an interesting path into that.
When did you get fascinated with the North Mississippi country blues?
Somewhere around high school, and then very seriously in college. I was at UNC Chapel Hill and studied with and really went under the wing of Bill Ferris, who I mean, he's had quite a career, but he's from Vicksburg, Mississippi. He documented all of his own communities in the 60s and 70s, musicians, artists, neighbors. He's founded the Southern Folklore Center in Memphis, and then the studied for Southern Studies program at Ole Miss, and then the Southern Studies program at UNC. He was the head of the NEH under Bill Clinton. So just a guy who's deeply from Mississippi, but has also documented all of that culture from BB King to truly just neighbors, and done that very equally through his whole career, and that really resonated with me. That type of field recording, but I think there's a big difference in sort of one's own stakes when you're traveling to a distant place and making recordings and returning versus recording the people who you live with. I mean, I think like a low stakes version of that is there's a, I know I feel like it's a fairly common thing for for like a young student to be assigned like record your grandparent telling a story.
Right.
And that immediately creates a very interesting and different dynamic than, you know, so and so is a professional ballet dancer, and I'm going to, go and do an interview at their apartment because, you hit a different type of formality. And so, for the same way, for Bill Ferris to be recording, and yeah, Fred McDowell or BB King or whatever, but to be doing it as a local Mississippi boy as opposed to someone who's come across the ocean and has this set of expectations, like it's very different. That's something that stuck with me.
And it is something that you got involved in as well.
It is, yeah. I mean, I mean, I think my love and interest in that music and those sounds led to me. I mean, it did lead to me simultaneously like playing that music, recording that music from, living musicians, attempting to release it into the world. But for me, that's all been the same. I'm just sort of chasing a style and a music that I felt passionately about or that resonated with me.
Sorry, but what motivated you to do the recordings?
It's an interesting question. It's the same thing of just the love for wanting to the love for the music. I mean, really, it is that simple. I think there are examples of other people who sort of coexist similarly in those realms, but it has been an interesting. I've always worn all of those hats simultaneously. Again, for better or worse.
For was there a reason? Like, did you know that you wanted to be a record producer, a musician, a
No, I just
recording
wanted to
studio?
do it. I mean, I very blindly followed. I love this music. I love this sound. I would like to be able to do it. I also would like to celebrate the people who are doing it because it's amazing to me. And um, there wasn't a lot there. I mean, those records weren't coming out. Those people weren't really being recorded at that point. So there I was.
And then what did you get out of that whole experience?
A lot of heartache, a lot of crushed dreams and disillusions. No,
Can you explain that a little bit? Like, what do you mean?
yeah, I won't do it quite so cynically off the bat. What I got from it was, I mean, I remember sitting and there's a Fat Possum is the record label that put out a ton of that music in the early '90s. And later too, but it sort of peaked there, and then Junior Kimbrough passed away, and Arl Burnside passed away, and Otha Turner passed away, and Fat Possum sort of started pivoting, and there were a few artists, namely Kenny Brown, who had been Arl Burnside's sideman forever, and I loved the one Kenny Brown album that came out on Fat Possum that I had a CD of at the time. Um,
Is that
and I think,
Stingray?
uh, yeah, I think it is. Yeah, I think it is Stingray because there's later I found headed back to Mississippi or going back to Mississippi, and then he has that other self-released one. I think self-released Meet You in the Bottom, but I think yeah, it must have been Stingray, which is a funny title now that I think about it, but whatever. And so I knew that existed, and then I had seen there was one compilation from the North Mississippi Hill Country Picnic, which I didn't know anything about, but saw who was on that compilation. And so, like this story always goes, I tracked down the phone numbers and names and emails I could find, and learned that um, Sarah and Kenny Brown were running that picnic festival together,
Right.
putting that on. And then there were some grants floating around UNC, and I put together a proposal to basically spend a bunch of the summer recording North Mississippi, a younger generation of North Mississippi blues. And then I think behind the scenes, and I didn't know this, but I think Bill Ferris snuck in some like assuring words that I was maybe a decent person, and I think that probably helped open a few doors unknowingly. I mean, unknowingly to me that that was going on. And then, yeah, I was in North Mississippi recording Kenny Brown and Little Joe Ayers, who had been Junior Kimbrough's bass player forever and wrote a lot of those songs with him. And I recorded and co-produced two North Mississippi Hill Country Picnic albums, the compilations from that, and a few different other things. I recorded and then got to help mix North Mississippi All Stars live album because they wanted to put out the recording of one of their sets from that picnic festivals. And then yeah, that was like 3 years of my life was either driving back and forth from Chapel Hill to North Mississippi, which is like a solid 12-ish hour drive, or spending weekends or weeks at a time and kicking between North Mississippi and Memphis and doing that.
And by this time, are you thinking this is what you want to do in getting into record production? And
Yeah, unfortunately, I've never stood back long enough to have that thought. It's just what I was doing and what I was passionate about, and just sort of one thing leading to the next thing. That was before Spot. I mean, commercially speaking, that was before Spotify was in the U.S. And so I could put out. The deal was very simple for all those records, and I mean, I don't mind talking about this because it's reality. But whatever the costs for the recording of, which were minimal, because I just had this portable rig in the back of my car. I would press up 1,000 CDs and put those out there through, and that got increasingly distributed as it went on, CD to CD, and a lot of those would sell. And so after the very direct costs had recouped, it was just a 50-50 split between Devil Down Records, my little entity, and the artist. And CDs were selling and streaming didn't exist. And so there would be enough money to come in to break even, buy another cheap microphone or two, you know, pay the artist and, keep paying the artist and then do it again. And that just rolled.
did you have any formal training in recording
Oh
technology?
no. No, not at all.
So how I presume that was it easy to learn that side of things, and in a way, one could argue that field recordings or blues recordings kind of lends itself to that simplicity. But was it frustrating to work that way, or did you think that that suited the genre perfectly?
No, it was again, I didn't think it through that much. It really was a pure joy that I was recording these sounds that I admired so much. I mean, I remember sitting in Chapel Hill listening to Stingray obsessively and teaching myself those guitar parts, like, and then realizing, like, oh, open G is a tuning. That's where these songs live. And then 8 months later, I was on Kenny Brown's porch recording this album uh, of his, and that was the most fulfilling feeling on earth. And so anything in terms of um, making the recording or placing microphones or whatever, I was just, desperately trying to trust my ears and do it. Um, and yeah, continually try to improve a little each time. And those were very cheap microphones in a very cheap setup. And I listen back and it sounds right. It sounds like it felt at the time.
And then what's it doing for you as the artist?
As an like for me as an artist,
Yeah, this experience, and I'm not sure how much of this you're recording yourself as well.
yeah. I mean, at some point, I was sort of learning through osmosis, with all being around so much of this music and hearing it played and recording it and then mixing it, which is a different relationship to sound. And then, I was writing songs in that style because I was totally immersed in it. And then at some point, sort of turned the microphone on myself and was in for a rude awakening. but it to me it was all the same. It was like here's this sound and style I love, and here's this is bringing it out of the air, and this is putting it into the air, and that that was just bliss. I was just very simply minded chasing all of that.
Okay, at some point or another, you, I think, acquire a love for poetry,
Yeah,
and you write poems
I do.
and study poems. Does that connect into any of this? Is this something totally separate that you kind of worked in, or how does the poetry work for you?
No, I mean the world of poetry and of very serious creative writing is the world I actually grew up in. My dad directed the low residency MFA program for writers at Warren Wilson College, which is the nation's first and best low residency MFA, with people from all over the country and the world attending. It was founded by a woman named Ellen Bryant Voigt as a new model and was a totally revolutionary model. And so, yeah, I grew up in the world of the best writers in the country, and maybe even more importantly, the best writers who were really serious about teaching, which is different, and is unfortunately very different from how I understand the world of music to work. Um, but the power of that MFA program was that Ellen was relentless in uh, making sure that the people who were there were really serious about teaching. It wasn't a place to pitch a manuscript or to meet with an agent or other elements of the publishing world. And so for me, the music was the other world to venture into. Despite my mom's viola playing and my dad's real passion for a lot of music, which was there. Like I didn't grow up around musicians or like grow up going to music camps or things like that. I I grew up, yeah, immersed with these writers, which is a funny bunch. That's a very different social dynamic.
I can imagine. But
Yeah.
did you consider yourself a writer at one
Um,
point?
I mean, I think I do now, but that was been so in the air and in the water my whole life that it's I don't know. I think one of my I forget whose line it is, but it's like encouraging artists. It's like don't be a writer, just go write. And in a similar way, like don't be a music. And I think in my life I've felt much more at home. Like of course I like write and have writing around me, and it's been much more of a challenge of like how do I become a musician, which is silly because it's the same conundrum. But yeah, the writing was there.
But both very, very difficult career paths.
Oh yeah, both worthless as career paths. I mean, if anything, just one worse than the other.
But
Yeah,
did you think about teaching? Was that a possibility?
no, I don't. I haven't. I don't have any. I don't have any real academic chops to the level of being able to teach. Yeah, I love thinking critically and about music and about writing. I think in music that comes out a lot in the engineering and production work I do. I think that's very critical listening and trying to basically edit sounds in real time. And then in writing, yeah, I mean, I got my MFA from that program eventually, and work with and collaborate with a lot of other people from that program.
So when you started writing songs, is that writing in the lyrics of your songs connected to you as a writer? Is that two separate things, or is that
Um,
the same thing?
yeah, I think the song started much more simply and started being based around sort of this like North Mississippi blues style and canon. One of the tricky things for writing lyrics and writing songs in that style is that there's no like A pattern the way there is in like 12 bar blues based forms. It's much more. sort of trance state oriented. There's usually like a riff and another riff, or maybe
Right.
and or just a series of riffs that you move between. It's a funky form, and of course everyone does it differently. So no, that was very different. And then I think I there are some songs of mine that operate more in like a songwritery mode, which I would say leans more in that direction. But no, I think for me most songs start with a musical idea that words can attach themselves to, or that can be attached to, and with poems, all the sounds and rhythms are sort of embedded in the words on the page instead of thinking about how it interlocks to a musical phrase.
So somewhere in between, you wind up working for Arden Studios.
Yeah.
Does that come from your work in the field and your ability to record and then, I guess, produce your own albums and put out your own albums? Or does that come from, how does that happen?
No, that's yeah. I was working with well, I was putting out these blues albums that were doing pretty well with CD sales. And again, it was tiny and all just my own efforts. But there was a combination of that, and I was working with Mary Lindsay Dickinson, who's the mother of the North Mississippi All Stars, and her husband Jim Dickinson had been really a legendary producer in Memphis and at Ardent specifically is where he spent most of his career. And after he passed, there was a lot of work that needed to be done with sort of organizing his estate, organizing publishing information, organizing the royalties and credits that are such a mess in the world of the music business. And I think probably thanks to a Bill Ferris stamp of approval, I ended up doing a lot of that work with Mary Lindsay. And that was basically with her and with Ardent to organize those things and to collect those records and make sure that, like the records, like documents, not like musical records, to make sure that that could all be, those royalties could all be transferred. And, you know, I mean, Mary Lindsay's a very proud grandmother now, and that's a lot of college funds. You know, um, and yeah, I think all that caught the attention of John Fry, who was the owner and operator and founder of Ardent. And so he ended up, and Ardent ended up hiring me to revive their record label, which had been dormant for a decade or so. It kind of been on again, off again through the studio's history, but to revive their record label and produce all the albums and sign all the acts for that label.
That sounds like a big deal.
It was, yeah. I'm really proud of a lot of the albums that did happen. I was there for 4 years. I think that that was right about the time that Spotify came in. And I think Ardent was used to a world where the record label side could kind of be a cash cow. You know, they would have a studio client that was really good or was making a great album that wasn't signed. And then in the past, they could say, well, great, we'll put it out. Like, we're just going to take this music and we have distribution. I mean, long ago, Ardent was connected with Stax. And that's like Big Star, the band, very famously. Horribly timed, but that was the album that was supposed to merge Ardent and Stax as like music releasing entities, not just studios. And you know, I think my experience at Ardent was tricky because Spotify came in, none of those models were working in terms of we can sell. You know, they were very interested in seeing, okay, if we signed 5 bands that each could sell X number of units, what does that look like? But I mean, from the time I was there, I went from what is streaming to iTunes Store as a digital unit that could be calibrated for album budgets to, you know, the abyss that we're now just, you know, really scraping the bottom of. And that was pretty challenging. And then John Fry and John Hampton passed away back to back at the end of 2016. John Hampton was the head engineer at Arden at that time, and they passed away back to back, and that was sort of the writing on the wall for me that it was time to move on.
Time to move on and become a musician?
Yeah, I had been touring that whole time, And so then I had an album I was excited about, and it was a good album, and I leaned fully into that. Yeah, Ardent was doing a restructuring. They wanted to lean more into the Christian label that they had had in the past, and they wanted me to pick that up, and that wasn't a world I was well versed in, and I also didn't think that I was really in a position to succeed with what the environment was like in that transitional time. So that was my farewell, and
I'm curious as to somebody who got deep into the music industry, got the understanding of the behind the scenes and the workings of a record label, a studio, publishing, and have I presume you got a pretty good handle on what that business meant at that point, and then seeing the effects of streaming, iTunes and Spotify. As an artist, how do you make that transition? What's your thinking about how you approach being an artist, knowing all that stuff?
I mean, again, not a lot of thinking. I was really excited about the album I had made. I was really excited about the band that I had at that time, and we did a lot of touring. And it was, I think we made good music, but it certainly wasn't a wise, like, career move or anything like that.
But at this point, you're fully a full time musician. This is what you committed to, and this is who you are.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, I still produced some albums for other people at that time, sort of from those relationships. But no, I wanted to turn totally into that world.
Okay, so when you turn to, and I don't know what year we're talking about at this point.
Early 2017.
Okay, so but by 2017 you had released a number of albums,
Oh yeah,
and you continue to release a number of albums.
that's right.
Like you're very prolific,
Yeah,
and not only in one style but many different styles.
yeah.
Tell me the
Maybe. Yeah,
thinking behind that.
yeah, yeah. I know it's disappointing, but the thinking is really not my forte. I mean,
It's just doing.
yeah, really just doing and just, really pretty blindly following what music was inspiring to me and what sounds were inspiring to me and who I was working with too. I had a very blues rock oriented trio that basically did everything from 2011 to 2014 or 15 ish. And then I had amazing, I mean, I still do, but I met for the first time an Italian guitarist named Adriano Viterbini while I was touring in Italy, with the blues rock, very heavy blues rock music. And Adriano is a phenomenal guitarist, and we immediately did an album together, a duo guitar album. But he opened my mind in a lot of ways. I mean, he's someone who plays all music and I mean, he's virtuosic in his abilities, so he just plays what he wants. And that was very eye opening. I was in Memphis, so I was working with some incredible horn players, notably Art Edmiston, a saxophone player who was in Mofro for a long time, and then was in Greg Allman's band, and now is in Little Feat and a bunch of other Memphis groups. And so yeah, I was really just following one sound to the next sound, and leaning into that. Again, for better or worse, but it has been interesting. Not well calculated, but interesting.
I mean, you've done instrumental albums, you've done various types of genres, and but it's not with a lot of thought behind it. It's not with a lot of planning, and it's what you felt like doing.
Yeah, I would say that each album or each release has been very thought of in terms of like, here's what I would like to do with this, and then figuring out the best approach or the approach that I like, taking the production and the pre-production elements very seriously. But in terms of like sitting back and saying, I want to be known as a blues guitarist. I'm going to spend the next 5 years releasing a series of albums that features blues guitar. No, that I've never put myself into life that way.
Do you think that works for you or against you, or Neither.
Commercially, definitely against, just absolutely against as much as possible. I think that, I mean, spiritually and musically, it's all I'm interested in. I never set out to be a guitar player that could play all kinds of music, or never set out to be a guitar player that could be hired in different bands and just wanted to play guitar. It's always been a chase of me making music I'm passionate about making, and just following that. And yeah,
But do
that's
you think your followers, your fans, do they think they? I presume they accept you for who you are and this ever changing genre person. That if they like you, they like what you do, no matter if it's blues or a singer songwriter or an instrumental.
yeah. I think that's true. I think that yeah, I think so. I think people who have seen the various shows over the year, a real similarity through that has been, I play a lot of slide guitar. That's probably the thing I do most notably on stage. And so I think that that's kind of a common thread. Even I mean, I think the albums probably sound more different than the live show has over the years.
Right.
Just because, I mean, the studio is kind of a different land to explore. Um, and I enjoy that, and I enjoy creating very different atmospheres in the studio. But I guess I haven't really had the budget or luxury to like reshape the touring show each time, and this time present a completely different thing. But that's been my journey.
Okay, so tell me about the last 4 years,
Oh
because it
yeah.
sounds like it's been a journey.
Yeah, the last 4 years have probably been the most action-packed of my life. Um, so what happened? I mean, so we're the full-time touring musically, was really my existence right up until COVID, and we all know what happens there. And I started getting my MFA in poetry, coincidentally right when COVID started too. I finally was going to pursue that avenue of my creative work, seriously, and then the world stopped as it is. And the
So, can you just kind of explain what that means when you said that's what I need to pursue seriously? Like, what would
Yeah.
that have meant?
Well, it meant applying and then enrolling in the Master of Fine Arts and Poetry program, which is a serious amount of writing and studying and learning and commitment. Um,
And giving up music, or
no,
putting
doing
music to
them
the side?
simultaneously.
Okay.
Um, Yeah, I mean the idea was, it's a low residency program, so I was going to do that without interruption to my musical life, and then COVID came down, and there was no touring, and so all of a sudden what I had expected to go from like 75-25 to 50-50 flipped the other way,
Right.
because I was practicing and making music at home and whatever else, but there was no touring, so poetry became my days.
And how did that? I mean, obviously it affected all of us, but how did that affect you, and what did that do for you or against you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the time was really good. I think like anyone, there's a lot of reflection, then about sort of what I was doing. But for me, the sort of the hiccup or the strain where this story gets a little less common, I think, is that um, in so COVID, I mean, but was when it was in its different waves of most highest intensity, and then I set up and launched out on a really big tour in November and December of 2021. Um, and that was with a trio that I loved. I had released some music during COVID, which was probably a bad idea. But I released some albums during COVID, and this was like a full, like nationwide tour with this trio that we sounded great. great musicians, really interesting set list, doing a lot of cool music. And um, right around in about sort of the first week of that tour, I started to get really sick in very in like very unfamiliar and confusing gastrointestinal ways. And touring is really the worst setting for that. If you can imagine, lots of stress, no sleep, not a lot of control over diet. Of course, always the temptation of alcohol and everything else, and crazy hours and all of that. And so that just got brutally worse through that tour, and uh, nothing helped. It just got worse and worse and worse. And to the point that I was uh, functioning, but barely. As in, I was playing the shows, but I was completely overwhelmed by how awful this was. And I got back to Nashville, and which is where I was living, and eventually, saw a doctor and saw a series of doctors and a series of tests, and then began this really frustrating and disheartening series of medical mysteries and medications and failed medications that basically led to um, I mean it took a year and a half from that point to get diagnosed with Crohn's disease. um, and Crohn's disease is not really a helpful name because it just means the immune system is going bonkers in the GI tract. And there are so many different ways that shows up, and there are so many different experiences people have with that yeah, I don't know. It's like saying I was diagnosed with my head hurting. It's like, do you have a headache? Are you depressed? Are you schizophrenic? It's like, it's such a blanket term that we know so little about medically, that it's pretty frustrating.
At
But
what point do you see a change or an improvement?
not until, uh, let's see. So that all started in November of 2021. So 2 years, November of
Wow.
2023. And at that point, I had gotten divorced and moved to New York, and it started a very different life because I was very sure I was dying. Everything was getting worse. Just to be a little graphic, I was losing enormous amounts of blood in very unpleasant ways, and I would get prescribed a medicine, and it would sort of plateau the problems for a brief, maybe a few days, and then it would just plummet worse again. Um, and we've never seen anything like this. And well, is this a genetic disposition? Do you have family history? No, no, no. So that was a sort of train wreck, medically, but also emotionally, that I didn't deal with very well. But I just, yeah, between COVID's, all kinds of crazy relationship things happened all over the world to people through COVID. But the combination of COVID and the sudden end of touring and this like really debilitating illness and the mystery of it was enough that made me just really, really kind of lose my mind and want to change scenes and end that relationship, which felt like it was had some. It just felt like we wanted to go in different directions, and that I felt like I had to act right then. Because there was no sense of like, oh well, things will improve, and then once they've stabilized, we can really seriously talk about what life is leading to and anything. It was just total abyss.
But when you're in this abyss and you end that relationship, which would have been a big part of your life, are you better, like physically and mentally better, or are you still struggling through?
No, still in total collapse.
Wow.
Yeah, just getting worse and worse and worse. Um, and that was kind. I mean, unfortunately, that was kind of a motivating factor. Was just how much worse that was getting. It's like, well, if there are other things I want to do with my time on this planet, better do them now, you
So
know.
you're actually thinking that this could be it.
Oh yeah. No, I mean I most days I couldn't get off the floor or leave an apartment for more than about 30 minutes. I mean, it was just brutal. I mean, the pain level, I was becoming extraordinarily anemic because I was losing so much blood. I lost a ton of weight because you're when your gastrointestinal tract is basically one giant open bleeding wound. You don't absorb any nutrients. You don't process anything. It's just yeah, chaos.
When is the turning point? What happens to improve that situation?
I finally found a doctor. I mean, in New York, I hadn't really enjoyed some of my medical experiences in the Nashville area, which was just kind of bad luck, probably. And I found a doctor who was willing to or who saw the damage at that extent and immediately prescribed a really heavy dose of steroids to at least combat the active open wounds, the ulcers, and that the steroid life was very interesting mentally and psychologically, but physically it immediately started to help.
Wow, because that can do a real number on you.
Oh yeah, it was insane. Never needed to sleep, never needed to eat, just burned, just burned, but started to heal internally.
How long did that healing process take?
Um, that took about another year.
Wow. Now,
Yeah.
creatively, are you doing anything while this is happening?
Yeah, I mean, I played shows that whole time and did a lot of recording. I think that, I mean, I listen to those recordings now, and there are some things that really interest me, and then there are a lot of things where I can just tell spiritually and vocally that things are unsettled. Moving from Memphis and Nashville, which are very different climates in every sense, to New York, which and recording in an urban setting was the first time in my life of like playing music in an urban setting. Which sounds really dramatic, but like the air is different. It's not the humid air. It's not the South. It's a totally different sonic environment and totally different physical environment, uh, different musical environment, big time. And I think I think I can hear the adjustment period.
I mean, with all that you've gone through, there's obviously a big adjustment,
Yeah.
right? Like, so I don't
Oh,
know
all
how
of it.
yeah, like it's crazy. But you thought that it was necessary to make all those changes. To,
Yeah. Yeah,
and
I think so.
and so I don't know if you can vocalize this, but what did you learn from that whole experience?
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's to be determined in terms of a good tight answer. I think one thing I've learned is to try to talk about points of tension in a relationship earlier. Um, I think it's deeply, maybe this is the only childness of my life, but I think I am very deeply an empathetic pleaser. I'm someone who's hyper aware of other people's emotional states, and on the bright side, that makes me very good. Like as a producer in the studio, I can sort of pick up on everyone's energy and confidences and insecurities very quickly, and I'm good at talking to different people. Um, on the downside, I often am way more focused on other people's emotional states than my own. And so, in any relationship, whether that's romantic or a business relationship or playing on stage live, a musical relationship like that, um, I'm too quick to set aside or overlook my thoughts, feelings, needs, desires in the name of sort of placating the people around me, which is, yeah, I think in some scenarios that's a real strength, but in other scenarios you actually end up, I think, shortchanging those relationships because you're not being honest about what you need or disagree with or something like that. Um, and so that's something I try to keep in mind across relationships and across uh, yeah, business or music or romantic or collaborative of some nature or even, just friendships do a better job of saying like, this is where I'm at. Here's where I think you're at. Let's talk. Because I think the other real catch 22 with that is if you're so focused on someone else's state, you end up um, I think you just find yourself in a slippery slope of assuming you understand what that person wants because you're trying to be so in tune with what they're looking for. Um, and that's not true. That's not necessarily true or accurate. So let's take it in a musical context. I could be on stage. There's another guitarist in the quartet now, and I could spend a whole evening on stage thinking, oh, Eric really likes to solo in this particular way. I'm going to leave room for him so that he always has this certain set of frequencies in this area of the guitar available for these solos, and I'm going to avoid them. And then, later in the night or another day, Eric might say, why are you never playing that part that goes so well in the song? And it's because I've been assuming the whole time, like, I need to stay out of that way so that Eric can have that spot. Or I
Right.
need to take fewer solos so Eric can take that solo so that he can have a moment. But then he might say, like, no, Reed, like, I love supporting your solo in that spot. Why did you stop doing it? Like, it's hurting us that you're not taking that moment because it's yours. Like, and so that's something I try to be better with my communication about in all the different types of relationships.
I mean, if you've gone through a period where you don't know if you're going to survive, that's got to change you, right?
Yeah, I think it does. I think it does. I think any real like schism event like that, people come out of differently. I would like to think that I'm more in tune and grateful and aware of life. I think really, and I don't know if this is healthy or not, but I think really what it's led to is I've taken on a lot more, and I work a lot more.
Because you just don't
Musically and
take time for
production.
granted. Is that why?
Yeah, I think that's partly it. I think I'm feel more aware of the clock, and but I think that's also just an age thing too, maybe. But I do find myself much more serious about the things I'm doing and much more dedicated to uh, applying myself. And I don't think I've ever really been a slacker, so to speak. But I
Not
do
based
think
on
I'm
the
still
output of your albums.
no, no, and I go back and forth on whether that relationship to that kind of work is actually beneficial to the art or not. Just so I have something that keeps me up at night. But yeah, I would say, I run this studio now, which I'm very proud of, but is an unbelievable amount of work. This band is really good. This album is really good. The shows are really good. Um, I co-edit a literary journal and send out poems and all that stuff. And I really care deeply about all of it and believe in it. That's probably more things than a human can do at the same time. Well, but I'm learning that the hard way.
Okay, but one of the end results of this whole journey over the last few years is the album that you're talking about, World on Fire,
Yeah,
which was recorded in 2 days,
yeah, that's
if
right.
I'm not mistaken, with 4 mics, I
Yep.
believe.
Yeah, that's all exactly right.
So in some ways, and maybe I'm wrong, but in some ways it goes back to your field recording days, to the simplicity of it all. I mean, I don't know if that's on purpose or that's just the way you do things, but
No, to me, that's one of the reasons why the album is so significant, is because it does feel so full circle in that way. I've done a lot of recording sessions over the last 2 years, trying to find the next album, and some of those things have turned out pretty well. But this, I think, really turned out like magic. And I think part of it too is, my relationship with the other three musicians has really grown. They all live in the neighborhood. They're all here in Brooklyn, and uh,
So this is relatively a new band.
yeah, relatively a new band, but some guys I've known for a long time. They've been here and I haven't been. But I was listening to the Muddy Waters Folk Singer album a lot, which
What
is
a great
an
album.
unbelievable album musically and sonically. And that album is pretty funny and how it came those sessions came together. But I was really into that album, still am, and I wanted to do an acoustic album that just focused on the songs that I first picked up guitar to learn how to play. And I talked to those guys who I'd been playing with electric and live, and said, I just want to try this. I want to take these slide guitar songs and record them and produce them in the headspace of this Muddy Waters album. And I want to do it, super stripped down, purely acoustic. Uh, those three guys all have pretty heavy duty jazz backgrounds too, and just very minimal drums, upright bass, two acoustic guitars, and I just want to see what happens. And I sent them demos of all the songs, which was just me and acoustic guitar singing in this room, and they were into it. They're like, "This is cool. Like this sounds like there's something to it." Because yeah, these are the songs I've known longest, and we recorded. We spent some time getting the studio set up in a way that seemed to capture the sound just how we wanted it, with one mic per musician. Um, and we pressed record, and that was it. I mean, the rough mixes from those sessions is the album. We tried to mix it and tried to do it more properly and all of that, and considered edits and considered all of those types of things, and nothing felt as good as the rough mixes from those two nights.
I was kind of surprised with all that you've gone through that you would choose non-original songs, and also because you're a writer.
Yeah.
So I don't know with all what you've gone through if it was easy to write about what you went through, or and maybe you have a lot of that. But
Yeah.
to do this album and to go back to those songs from your early days that influenced you, I thought was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's next. I think that these songs felt so good in the moment and still feel so powerful because they're really a version of where am I? And they're very much based in, where am I? What still resonates with me? What matters after this whole stretch and fiasco and so many changes? And this and some of the sessions that I've done over the last year and a half or so are with new original music and all of that, and none of it felt ready. All of it still felt too unsettled, and not in an interesting way, just and not in a way that felt like it was communicating in a good way. And this recording session felt like exactly where I needed to be. So I think that's next. This is sort of the reestablishing the grounding point.
Right.
And now now I'm excited to grow from there.
Yeah, and I wonder how easy it is to actually capture what you went through, which is multiple of different things. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
to properly or to capture it right now, whereas maybe it might be easier a couple of years from now, or as time moves.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of like models for people who do that well, one of my favorite songwriters is Pop Staples.
Hmm.
And he always one of his famous lines was that he wanted some part of his songs to be ripped from the headlines. But almost all of his songs sound so timeless. Um, and I think in his case, it's because he's cleverly writing about his contemporary world, but within so many biblical references and deep gospel traditions. Um, and I think I'm much more drawn towards that kind of weaving of the personal and of the contemporary into these timeless elements. And I mean, there's great classic imagery and like traditional like country songwriting and all that. That's not to say that those that other genres don't have that, but it is the combination of like the objective and the subjective that I'm so drawn to, and those are trickier to write, and I think those are slower to write too. I don't want to sit down and say, here's my diary entry from the last year. I'm much more interested in figuring out a way to write about some of those experiences, but in a way that's yeah, in a way that is more lasting.
It must be something else to have to gone through all that pain, like physical pain and agony and emotional pain and everything,
Yeah.
and to come out the other side and be able to look back on it, hopefully in a positive way.
Yeah, I don't think I'm looking back quite yet. In the sense of, I think there are a lot of things that have yet to actually stabilize in my life. And I think that's part of why sort of this is why this album is so fitting now. I don't think I've hit the point of like, and I mean, we don't or can go there, but with sort of the state of our world as it is too, it does not feel like a. It probably never is, but it does not really feel like a time to be uh, sort of placating,
Positive?
pondering. Yeah, I mean, positive is one thing. I would take positive, not just dumb positive, but actual positive. But it doesn't feel like the time to sit back and say, oh, here's my times of turmoil. I've left them behind.
Right, right.
Here are the green acres I'm looking out on. So we'll see. We'll see. But I do think that original material is the next album. I mean, this tour that we're about to head out on next week, we're playing the album, but then we're playing a handful of original tunes too, and I think we'll start to develop more of those through that.
Well, it's a lovely album. The
Thank you.
album's called "World on Fire." It's beautiful, and when you say, because I didn't know the reference to folk singer, but folk singer is such a beautiful album, and it makes sense to me now that you mention it.
Yeah. Yeah, that was very literally the sort of challenge on the production side. It's okay. Like for me, the things that stand out about folk singer are the instrumentation, of course, the level of detail that's audible in all the instruments, but especially in the two guitars and the upright bass. And then the other thing I really admire is the way Muddy Waters is so specifically aware of how to move his body to and from the microphone and put his voice off axis and move closer so that all of those shouts, he pulls back and goes sideways, and then all of those more like guttural sounds and like vowel sounds, he works way up to the mic. And that kind of hyper focused an intimate vocal delivery. It's how I wanted to present these songs in my voice, and like right, Muddy Waters is super aware of where if he pushes more air vocally, when he will catch the reverb, and you hear him work those shouts into that reverb tail and then pull off and be very soft where it won't, the send to the reverb won't activate in the same way. And so we spent a lot of time before the recording session really trying to dial in some of those elements with mic placement and different gear positioning and settings to make a situation in the studio where that kind of performance was possible, because that's not something that you can do after the fact. That
No,
that like proximity to the microphone, working the reverb so specifically with the vocal, like that has to happen as part of the performance. So yeah, we went to pretty great lengths to try our best, and I love that what we got. I hear the relationship, but it doesn't sound like a copy of folk singer.
no.
I think we ended up with a unique thing, even though when we went into it, we said exactly, here's what we're trying to do. And I mean, that's the beauty of trying to make original art is to say like, okay, this inspires me. I love it. I want to try to do it, and then you do it, and you end up with a completely different thing. Um, that's what's nice about being a human.
Yeah, for sure. Well, well done. We should probably end this, but let me ask you one final question. At this point, do you have goals?
I mean, the big goal is to do the best I can to get this music out there, um, and to because I really do believe in it. You know, I've put out a lot of music. I think that this album is timeless, which is on one hand a brutally egotistic thing to say, but in terms of the delivery and the songs and the instrumentation, I think that I think everyone in the band and other people I've played it for, I think it's a recording that will hold up. I mean, there will always be things that I go back and hear and think, oh, if only I had sung whatever note differently, or oh, maybe there's a riff I could have played in. Sure, but I really feel strongly about how this turned out, and so it feels like the goal is to do it justice and get it in the world, and to play it live and to help it find its audience. Because I would like to do that while I'm alive.
And I guess we should end by saying you are all better. Like your health issues are no longer an issue.
No, I mean I'm on a bunch of drugs, and most of the time that's stable. But that's most of the time,
Right.
and it's Crohn's disease is an inflammatory disease, an autoimmune disease, and that's a type of disease that is so ridiculously common now that it's terrifying, and it's definitely environmental. I mean, that's not a disease that existed 100 years ago. But there's also a lot of research being done because if we're cynical, it's because there's so much money in it. But it's because so many people. I mean, most of the drugs that I'm taking now were originally developed for arthritis, because it's all based on inflammation and the immune system being freaked out in different ways. Um, so no, I mean I think it's important to say that I'm not I am my day to day life is much better. I'm very grateful for that, but the chronic illness is real, and there are a lot of people out there suffering similarly, and I think it's better to acknowledge that than to tie a bow on it. There are a lot of people suffering a lot more than me with a version of the same thing. So
We thank you so much for sharing all this and your music. I hope that the road is kind to you and that this album gets heard.
thank you. Oh, I
Thank,
really appreciate this interview. It's really been a pleasure to talk to you.
thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you.